Hello, everyone. This is M.R. Rangaswamy with Indiaspora. We are pleased to have all of you today for one of our COVID sessions, which we started when the pandemic started a couple of months ago. We've had many notable speakers, Dr. Vivek Murthy, the former Surgeon General. We had Dr. Ram from Apollo Hospitals. We had Geeta Gopinath, the IMF Chief Economist. And today we're privileged to have a father-daughter combination, both Deepak and Mallika Chopra, who are going to talk about mindfulness in stressful times. And I can tell you this, after being locked up in the house for over 2.5 months, we all could use a good dose of how to survive, how to thrive in these crazy times. Great to have so many of you Indiaspora members join us today. The format is going to be the following. Mallika is going to start off and set the stage, and then we'll also hear from Deepak. We've saved quite a bit of time at the end for questions. A lot of you have told us that you really want to talk to Mallika and Deepak, so we've set aside time. And you can do that either by asking a question online on video, or you can also use the chat box, okay? So to get started, we have Mallika Chopra. Mallika is a mom, media entrepreneur, public speaker, published author, and also an Indiaspora member. She's author of Just Breathe and another book also called Just Feel. And these are aimed at kids from 8 to 12 years old. They're beautiful, full color illustrated books. She's also written a book, Living with Intent, and she shares insights she gained to seek meaning and balance as a mom and an entrepreneur who was overwhelmed by work, family, and responsibilities. I'm sure a lot of you mothers out there feel the same way that Mallika felt when she started writing her book. So Mallika, welcome.
Thank you, MR, and nice to be in this forum. And I want to thank all of you in Diaspora who has been so supportive of all my books and sharing lots of the appearances I make. So it's nice to be here. First time I'm doing something like this with my dad watching on video. So that always adds a new twist, maybe a little pressure. I just wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about some of the work I'm doing, but why I'm doing it more importantly. I am an author, but I always say I define myself as a mom and mom first, something that I learned from my mother, Rita Chopra. So I have two daughters, 18-year-old Tara, who just graduated from high school 2 days ago in a virtual ceremony, and Leela, who's almost 16 years old. So the title of the seminar or workshop is Mindfulness in Stressful Times. So obviously we're living in unprecedented times, but in some ways I think we're always dealing with different forms of stress. And the stress may be more these days when we are trapped at home and thinking about lives and our lives and our purpose and our existence more when we're at home. But there's also, as always, global issues. Just today, we can look at what's happening in our country and the unrest we're seeing. So we always are facing dilemmas and questions and needing to search our soul for answers and how we can serve. So my journey to where I am today is obviously because of my parents. I grew up in Boston, where my parents had recently immigrated to the US as a young married couple with $8 in their pocket, a similar story to probably many others on this call. And my brother and I watched how hard they worked, how they had to find ways to connect with this foreign country, but really watching my father, who worked nonstop, but also trying to figure out our places in our families and in our communities and in the world. And so I will say that when my father discovered meditation, there was a huge shift in my family's life. I was about 9 years old and my brother Gautam was 6 years old. And the practice of meditation brought our family much closer together. In fact, it probably brought my father more into the family unit because he was so busy. But once, as a family, we began this practice, we were more connected. And so I went on to do, many things, got my MBA, started companies. But when I was about 30 years old and pregnant for the first time with Tara, 18 years ago, I was pregnant during 9/11, and on the morning of 9/11, received a phone call from my father. I was 5 months pregnant. My father crying on the other end of the line as he had just made an emergency landing when the first plane had crashed into the first building. And for a few hours, we thought that my brother was on one of the planes. And it was a time of a lot of stress. But as a mom, or about to become a mom, all of the hope, excitement, magic, and the inspiration of becoming a mother suddenly became fear, anxiety, stress, and deep questioning. And it brought me back to many of the techniques that my father had taught Gautam and I when we were young. So it began with meditation. And I'm not going to go into all of the benefits of meditation because you can Google that now and see all of the research. But when our meditation practice was about connection, but then also about self-reflection. And so I talk specifically a lot about intention, a phrase that my dad shared with Gautam and I when we were young. It goes like this: I am responsible for what I see. I choose the feelings I experience and set the goals I will achieve. And everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and receive as I have asked. So as kids, he would ask us, what do you ask for? And we would name all these material things, trips. But then he'd ask us about, do you want love, connection, a sense of purpose, inspiration? And so that really concept of setting intentions, our deepest seeds of desire for purpose, for connection, for love, had very much shaped my childhood. And in becoming a mother, I was reminded of so many of these techniques, because now I was really faced with the question of how can I serve? How can I serve my family and my community and my world? And so for me at that stage, there was a big shift in terms of my work, but also my purpose. And so I've now written several books. I spend a lot of time now working with kids in schools and in communities. And I feel so blessed because these were tools that I was given as a child. When I work with kids, it's really simple. So my books really are very practical and really don't have much philosophy. My father will take this on to talk about consciousness and other things, but I begin with kids really on the experience. So just really beginning, the title of my book is Just Breathe, of how do we take a deep breath and in and out. And in that process, how do we begin to connect to ourselves? So when I do these work with kids, and we can get more into this later if people are interested, really beginning with breath, 1 breath, 4 breaths, body awareness exercises, meditation practices, and then also sharing things with children and families, whether it is taking mindful walks or doing a mindful meal. And then my next book, which will come out next year, is about self-reflection and intention, where we start with kids to ask deep questions. Who am I? What do I want? How can I serve? What am I grateful for? And plant those seeds early on for a life of purpose. So my daughter is, my elder daughter is 18. She's hopefully heading off to college. And my dad did a beautiful tribute video for her in a family collection that we did, where he asked her to reflect upon her story. reflect upon all of the gifts that she's been given, reflect on the time that we're living in, and the unique time that we're living in, and then also think about now how she can bring her gifts to the world. And so, you know, I really feel like part of my legacy can be to pass on so many of these lessons to future generations. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to my dad to speak, and then I'm here for questions later on.
Is somebody else going to say something, or should I start?
I think MR may come back but he's muted right now.
Yes, I'm back. Thank you so much, Malika. I just wanted to give, I know Deepak doesn't need any introduction, but I still want to give him an introduction. He's a founder of the Chopra Foundation. It's a nonprofit entity for research and well-being. He also is a founder of Chopra Global, a modern day health company, which is at the intersection of medicine, of science and spirituality. He's also a clinical professor, if for those of you who didn't know it, of family medicine and public health at UC San Diego. And he's also a senior scientist at the Gallup organization. He's the author of 89 books, incredible, translated into 43 languages, including many New York Times bestsellers. Now he's on his 90th book, which I have to mention, called MetaHuman, Unleashing Your Infinite Potential, which is a national bestseller. Time magazine has also described Deepak as one of the top 100 heroes and icons of this century. So Deepak, with that, welcome, and we'd love to hear your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Amar. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Malika. I'm very privileged to be speaking to you, and I'll try and focus on the topic today, which is COVID-19 and what it's doing to humanity and how we might want to look at it in a positive way, even the COVID pandemic. But before I do that, since Malika is the quintessential storyteller, I was inspired just when she was speaking to give you a very short story. When she was, 9, 10, I spent a lot of time with my guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and he would speak for a long, long time, and they would fall asleep frequently. But there was one conference where we had a bunch of Harvard scientists, and the discussion was all about stress. And everybody was going over the biology of stress and what it does to the human body, what it does to inflammatory markers, blood pressure, on and on. After the conference was over, my guru, Maharishi, called me and very softly whispered in my ear. He said, "What is this stress?" He had never heard the word. He was not familiar with the concept. I said, Maharishi, stress is the perception of threat, psychological threat, emotional threat, physical threat. It's a perception of threat. And he thought for a bit, and he says, very interesting. I never heard of it. So that was a whole different world, completely different world. Now we are seeing, of course, a pandemic of stress, along with the pandemic of COVID-19. And what we have been looking at our foundation and at our library, along with other scientists, including Rudy Tanzi from Harvard, other scientists from UCSD, UCSF. We have a collection of scientists and advisors, including a Nobel laureate, Elizabeth Blackburn. And what we're looking at is very interesting right now in this pandemic. So what you may have noticed is that in the beginning, people were saying, it's the elderly who are getting sick. It's the elderly who are dying. And then it was modified to, well, there are some young people also who are getting sick. But the elderly who are getting sick already have risk factors like diabetes or obesity or heart disease or cancer or autoimmune illness, so they're at risk. And then suddenly we now see a lot of young people also who are getting morbidity and mortality, even dying from it, and other kinds of symptoms, cardiac arrhythmias, neural inflammation, inflammation in the small blood vessels, etc. So what is going on? And what we found was in our modeling, and right now modeling is a big thing, as you see every day there are models around COVID-19, etc. Our modeling showed that anyone who has chronic disease, and by the way, this is now established science, the first part is established science. Anyone who has chronic disease, and particularly the elderly, they also have what is called low-grade inflammation in the body, which can be measured through inflammatory markers, cytokines, they're called cytokines. So almost everyone, I shouldn't say almost everyone, not almost is not necessary. 100% of people who have chronic illness have also chronic inflammation. That's an established fact, which can be measured. The second thing, which most people don't know, is that people with chronic illness and low-grade inflammation also have chronic anxiety and chronic depression. And some of it is so low-grade that they're not aware of it. And very frequently, there's no reason that can be ascribed to the depression, the low-grade depression, and the low-grade anxiety that they have. But this is now established. Low-grade depression, low-grade anxiety, it's frequently called existential or free-floating anxiety because no reason can be ascribed to it. But the fact is low-grade anxiety, low-grade depression, and low-grade inflammation accompany all chronic disease and precede chronic disease by decades, sometimes 1 decade or 2 decades. And this precedes chronic diseases like Alzheimer's, like Parkinson's disease, many types of cancer, autoimmune diseases, type 2 diabetes, etc., etc. Now, on top of that, what our modeling showed, and this is, by the way, there's a peer-reviewed paper coming out in the next couple of weeks on these findings in a medical journal. So what our findings showed, in addition to the chronic inflammation, those who get acutely sick have what is called a cytokine storm. A cytokine storm means an inflammatory storm. So there's low-grade inflammation, and then there's suddenly a storm of inflammation. Now, low-grade inflammation is chronic, but acute inflammation occurs when people get pneumonia or get an injury or get some acute trauma, some acute injury. So now, on top of that, there's a cytokine storm. And that precipitates a crisis, whether it's respiratory distress, ultimately getting on a ventilator. And as you probably know, most people who go on ventilators, most actually, unfortunately, the majority don't come out of it, don't come off the ventilator. The young, yes, but if you're frail and old, it's unlikely you'll come off the ventilator. So cytokine storms are happening. Now, to complete the loop, this is all physiologically due to something called sympathetic overdrive. So you have two parts to your autonomic nervous system. The autonomic system regulates your biological processes without your conscious awareness. So you have two parts to this autonomic nervous system. One is the sympathetic nervous system. The second is the parasympathetic nervous system. When people have acute inflammatory storms as a result of stress, basically, stress is the basis of all inflammation in the beginning. Afterwards, it's many other things: lack of sleep, emotional disconnection, poor nutrition, lack of exercise, bad breathing, lack of mind-body coordination, lots of issues, emotional issues that can also cause stress. But the common factor is sympathetic overdrive. Your sympathetic nervous system is on hyperdrive. That causes the inflammation. Now, what people are not talking about is the counterpart to the sympathetic overdrive or the sympathetic nervous system, which is the other aspect of the autonomic nervous system, which is called the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system counters the effect of stress. And it hasn't been given too much importance except in Eastern wisdom traditions and in the yogic literature. But recently, there's been a lot of attention to the parasympathetic nervous system, but particularly to one nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is called the vagus nerve. So if there are any physicians here, they will, or any biologists, they'll know what the vagus nerve is. The vagus nerve is actually comes from the Latin word vagus, but is related to the English word vagabond. It's the 10th cranial nerve. It moves from your midbrain. It influences your facial expressions. Are you looking sad, happy, stressed? Influences your eye movements, the tone of your voice. In other words, it is a marker for how you're feeling emotionally. It also interacts with the facial nerve and the laryngeal nerve. So it triggers, the mood triggers the tone of voice and facial expressions, which can now be captured through technology. Micro expressions, voice analysis can all be captured through technology. The vagus nerve then travels to the heart, where it influences something called heart rate variability. So if you're stressed, your heart rate is very fixed. But if you're relaxed, flexible, adaptable, resilient, your heart rate varies from beat to beat. It's called heart rate variability. And if you have high heart rate variability, it shows resilience, relaxation, adaptability, and flexibility, both in the mind and in the body. The vagus nerve then goes through the diaphragm and innervates every organ in the body, every organ, the hollow organs, intestine, colon, etc., but also the solid organs like the kidney, the pancreas, the spleen, the liver, etc. So now, if you look at the yogic literature, you'll see that everything that yoga talks about is about vagal stimulation, everything. Now, in a few years ago, what happened is the FDA approved, for the first time, vagal stimulation for intractable epilepsy. So, some people don't respond to any drug or any maneuver when they have epilepsy. And if you put a vagal implant in the vagus nerve and you stimulate it with a device, let's say an iPhone or whatever, electrically, you can stimulate the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve has bilateral, bidirectional traffic from the brain to the body, as I just mentioned, but then from the gut back to the brain. And also the activity of the microbiome influences the vagal nerve and its activity. And actually the gut makes more serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, opiates than the brain does. And these are the molecules of emotion. So vagal stimulation became a popular thing for epilepsy. But to the surprise, the investigators found that people who had other chronic illnesses, for example, people who had asthma or rheumatoid arthritis or other autoimmune illnesses or type 2 diabetes or even cancer, they started to get better. Some of them had complete remission of their disease. If you want to look up this, you can go on the internet, look up something called polyvagal theory and many other references to it. But this was very interesting for the investigators because I met with the R&D chief of one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And he suggested to me that the next innovation would be something called bioelectrical medicine. And that was putting implants on different branches of the vagus nerve and stimulating through handheld devices. First of all, I told him, you don't need to put electrical implants. You can use a magnet to do the same thing because bioelectricity and magnetism are the same field. And so you don't have to be invasive. But then I also informed him that we can stimulate any branch of the vagus nerve through meditation, through mindfulness, through yoga asana, through deep breathing, through various techniques of pranayama, through social and emotional intelligence, on and on. I gave him all the references. He said, we know all that, but how do we make money? we can't make money on yoga. We are a pharmaceutical company. So in any case, they now have a whole division with 2,000 scientists, bioelectrical medicine. Long story short, we are talking about mindfulness and reflection and awareness and everything that Mallika is talking about, which is very specific in details. But all we have to look at is the 8 limbs of yoga. So if you look at the 8 limbs of yoga as described by Patanjali, the first 2, niyama and yama, are all the principles of social and emotional intelligence. All the principles. Everything we learn in the Western literature and more is in those 2 first principles. The third principle in yoga is pranayama. Hundreds of techniques to regulate your biophysiology. Hundreds, literally. And deep breathing is, you start with that, vagal breathing. It's called these days, what Mallika was talking about, is now called vagal breathing. But there are pranayams like Ujjayi and Bhastrika and Brahmari and all these that allow you to actually regulate specifically your autonomic nervous system, pranayama. That's the third limb. The fourth limb is yogasana. And you know, we all think of yogasana, it's all the postures, but the word yogasana means seat of awareness. So every yogic posture stimulates a specific part of the vagal nerve. In fact, a complete set of yoga stimulates every branch. Hatha yoga, Ashtanga yoga, stimulates every branch of the vagus nerve, as does pranayama, if you know the various techniques of pranayama. So those are the first 4 principles before we get into mindfulness and mindful awareness and reflection. The next principle, the 5th principle, is what is called pratyahara. Pratyahara is being able to shut off your senses and look within and actually sense what's happening in your bodily organs, including your heart, including your bodily organs. And today, the technical word for that is interoception. Not introspection, but interoception, which means perception is how you look at the outside world, and interoception is how you look at the inside world. That's what pratyahara is. And you can measure what happens with pratyahara. There's a part of the brain that's called the insula that sits between the emotional brain and the cortical brain. And the insula regulates biological function in the visceral organs, but it's also connected to the emotional brain, the limbic brain, which influences our biology as well. So pratyahara combined with social and emotional intelligence is the key actually to bioregulation of the body, with very specific targeted activities to bodily organs. So those are the first 5 limbs of yoga. And now we get into the ultimate, that's the sizzle. The steak is actually the next 3 practices. Dharana, which means focused awareness, which today we call mindfulness, which by the way is an inappropriate word. The original word for mindfulness was vipassana, which meant insight as a result of witnessing awareness. When you witness an activity without judgment, you actually are practicing mindfulness, what we call present moment experience, whether it's mindfulness of breath or mindfulness of bodily organs or mindfulness of emotions, mindfulness of mental space, mindfulness of perceptual space, mindfulness of body, mindfulness of what's happening inside the body, mindfulness of breath, where we start always, because breath is the interface between consciousness and biology. So what we today call mindfulness, which is a wrong word, but awarefulness would be an awkward word, so we go along with mindfulness, but it's actually awareness of the mind. The awareness of the mind is not the mind. The awareness of a thought is not a thought. It's just awareness. What, again, in yogic literature, we call sakshi, or the silent witness. Okay, so that's dharana. But dharana is also awareness during yogic practice of the body and different parts of the body. Dharana is also witnessing awareness of mental and perceptual space. Dharana is also witnessing awareness of the web of relationship. And dharana is also witnessing awareness of the connection of the human microcosm with the cosmic macrocosm, which we call the universe. Dharana is the original mindfulness practice. Dhyan then comes, that's the next seventh limb, dhyan. That is meditation, mantra meditation, transcending meditation, reflective self-inquiry, as Malika was just talking about. All of that is dhyan. And it involves many, many practices, but these days mantra meditation is very practical, reflective self-inquiry, which is frequently referred to as Atma Darshan. This is very important as practice of meditation, which is the flow of awareness ultimately to what is called samadhi. Samadhi is transcendence, which means you go beyond thought, you go beyond perception, and you're grounded in pure awareness prior to the conditioned mind. And that pure awareness is the ultimate healing. Actually, samadhi is the key to all existential suffering, including the fear of death, because in samadhi, you transcend the perception of space-time and causality, and you're in touch with the ground of all existence. So these 8 limbs of yoga are actually the key to counteracting the sympathetic overdrive that you are seeing with COVID storms. Our paper has now been accepted, and we'll be sending it along to you if you want, on how these different aspects of what we can only call consciousness, awareness, influence not only our biology, but also inflammation in general. Right now, the world is inflamed. It's not the body is inflamed, the mind is inflamed, the ecosystem is inflamed, and the whole biosphere is inflamed. And that also has social implications: riots, violence, political strife, discord, social injustice, economic injustice, climate change, mass migrations, populations, density of populations, humidity, temperature, social conditions, economic status, all are influencing the pandemic and its outcome. It's not just the infection. It's stress, it's the economic crisis, and the infection all at the same time. These are all entangled. And the first thing we can do is not panic, but see the COVID mutation as an indicator that the biosystem of our biology, what we call the biosphere of our biology, and the biosphere outside are the same biosphere. And the biosphere is governed or expressed through the microbiome. The human microbiome is 2 million genes that you have, and you only have 25,000 human genes. 2 million human genes, which is all the genetic information of planet Earth in the body and in the planet, is the microbiome, which is a combination of bacteria, fungi, and viruses, including coronaviruses. The COVID-19 mutation is the latest mutation. We call it 2019, but corona has been around since the beginning of time. Mutations occur when there is a stressed biosphere, and the biosphere is stressed. We know that. Climate change, eco-destruction, extinction of species, poison in the food chain, petroleum products in agriculture, etc. The biosphere is stressed. And as we return to our cages right now and speak on the internet, the biosphere is repairing itself. Birds are singing, people in Hyderabad can breathe, people can see the Himalayas from hundreds of miles away, fish are returning to dead lakes, even the canals of Venice, and you can see the stars at night, even in Delhi. So something is happening. The biosphere is repairing itself. COVID-19 is a mutation. Mutations always occur in times of stress of an ecosystem. And the ecosystem is our own microbiome, which is in our body, which is in the planet, which is in the biosphere. And that's going out of control. And as soon as it repairs itself, which it seems to be repairing itself, you will see the mutation will calm down. It will become now part of our ecosystem because it's there. It's not going to go away. We will adjust, we will be flexible, but we will also counteract the stress through vagal stimulation, short word. But I can say with confidence that this is the time to rethink everything from economy to social structures, to extreme nationalism, to bigotry, to hatred, to racism, climate change, sustainability. They're all connected. And if I was to choose one word, I would say the world is inflamed and we need to cool down. And that's where all these practices come in. That's it for me. I see that I'm 2 minutes over time, so please forgive me for going overboard. MR, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Deepak. Illuminating set of ideas and thoughts from you. Would love to have people ask you some questions. I'm sure there are people waiting. So anyone want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and put your video on as well, please, and come on. Who's first? Go ahead.
Could you talk a little bit about your personal practices?
My personal
What do you do every day?
have evolved over 45 years. So right now, my personal practice includes meditation on my own personal death at night. So I meditate on what that means and, confronting physical death and what that means to how I should live the rest of my life. I also do have a practice called Yoga Nidra at night. I ask questions before I go to sleep. In the morning, I wake up and download the answers, which then become basis for my books and talks. And then I have a practice of yoga. Malika will tell you, I've never missed a yoga session in years. And these days I have a lot of time. So I'm enjoying and celebrating existence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ray, nice to see you. My practices are different.
Hi.
I try to do my meditation practice at least once a day. And I have to say, inspired by my father, both my husband and I now are really committed to a yoga practice. So we have at least 45 minutes a day. We try to do our yoga practice. Not like him, who does it for 3 hours a day, I think, every day. But we are really trying to commit to the meditation and the physical aspect as well. The third thing that we've added here during the COVID time, because Sumantha's home all the time, we are going for walks outside. So really spending time in nature because we live in a beautiful place.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Deepak,
Hi, my name is
can I go?
Yes, Preeta, go ahead.
So, you said very aptly that the world is inflamed and we need to cool down. During the lockdown, everyone is introspecting and trying to find new ways to live. But how do we know everybody won't go back to doing exactly what they did and not worrying about the environment and just going back to spoiling that biosphere all over again?
So Preeta, right now, we're at a crossroads. If we go back exactly to where we were, I think we are risking our extinction. We are told by biologists that if insects and the microbiome disappeared, from our planet, in 5 years, life would cease on this planet. If humans disappeared from this planet, in 5 years, life would flourish on this planet. So who's the predator? The predator is Homo sapiens, the human species. And it's risking its extinction. There's a phrase in biology, a permanently victorious species risks its extinction. And that's where we're going with climate change, extreme social and economic inequalities throughout the world, mass migrations out of fear, both on the side, those who are migrating and those who are receiving the migrants, so much fear, so much violence. So we are risking our extinction. Either there's a grassroots movement, we can't trust governments, we can't trust politicians. Either there's a grassroots movement for social change and sustainability, and even new economic structures. We're seeing them. Cryptocurrencies are coming. Wall Street is nervous. Nation states are afraid of, these trade wars are happening. And for the first time, we also recognize maybe climate change is reversible. And also, an oil-free economy is possible. We saw that. The price of petroleum fell to less than zero. So we are seeing indicators that we can create in 10 years, we might see jet planes totally fueled by free of fossil fuels. Okay, every crisis in the last 100 years, and I know we're short of time, but every crisis in the last 100 years, including the 100-year-ago pandemic, First World War, and Great Depression, what emerged? AM radio. Second World War, what emerged? Television. 1990, after the economic crisis, what came? Internet. 2000, mobile phone. And then smartphones. Now artificial intelligence. Now all these new technologies. I'm sure when we are done with this pandemic and we go back, you'll have so many new innovations, so many new financial structures, and many other technologies to reverse climate change as well and focus on the real issues that confront humanity. And if we don't, it's fine. Nature will say humans were an interesting experiment, didn't work. That happens in evolution all the time. Last extinction was 65 million years ago, but that was because a meteorite fell on planet Earth and caused the equivalent of many atomic bombs or explosions. This next extinction will be fueled by human behavior, whether it's an atomic bomb or climate change or whatever else, unfortunately. So we have to make that choice now. I think the intelligent people in the world right now, the innovators and the creators, they're already coming up. Every day, I find new technologies, new algorithms, everything we've been saying about mind, body, consciousness, behavior, emotion, everything can be measured now. There's no experience that can't be measured in the brain. There's nothing that happens in the brain that can't be measured epigenetically, even at the level of genes. So, all these old ideas we had, you are your genes, you're not your genes. You are who you are based on how you reflect and find out who you are. And that influences everything. Genetic activity, neuroplasticity, inflammation, all of that. It's time for the world to embrace Eastern wisdom and not be stuck with reductionism. Even in this whole thing, the mindfulness movement, it's reductionist. Mindfulness has become such a popular word that's become so reductionist, it does not take the context from where this great body of wisdom comes from.
Amazing. Thank you.
Can I go?
Thank you, Deepak. Lakshmi.
We had a question from someone who's been raising their hand.
Absolutely.
Why don't you monitor this, MR, any way you want?
First, Deepak, if you don't mind, Lakshmi Challa is waiting to ask a question. Then I'll come to a couple of these others. Good. Lakshmi?
Oh, hi. This is actually Chandni Challa.
Okay.
I'm coming to this by way of my dad. So this is actually great. It's like dads helping their daughters become more spiritual, which is fantastic. But my question for Dr. Chopra is, can you talk a little bit just about this idea of entanglement and the concept of us all doing these practices together in a way that creates an aggregation of change, and how important that is?
Yeah, so when people meditate together, their brain waves cohere. So they have the same frequency of brain waves and they lock in. There's a frequency locking in of brain activity, which is measurable through EEG. Now, when people do that online, we've been teaching meditation online with the help of Oprah Winfrey. We've now taught 6 to 10 million people. I don't lost count last time. But when people meditate together online, presumably the same thing happens, but we haven't been able to measure that. Obviously, you can't do EEG on everyone disparately, although even that technology will come. Somebody will come up with that. I'm sure how you can measure EEGs of people across the world. But think of the internet as the global brain right now, and it's being rewired. And, I can give you a dopamine hit just by sending you an emoticon, on the internet. But I can also give you high blood pressure by abusing you on the internet. And, our president does it all the time. So, we are rewiring the emotional and intellectual brain through the internet right now. And ultimately, it's critical mass that will determine the outcome.
Great. Thank you, Deepak. We have a question all the way from Bangalore, India. Chris Gopalakrishnan. Chris?
Yeah, Deepak, my question is, in the Western system of medicine, you go from lab to the practice. And in the Eastern system, because it's from tradition, from 5,000, 7,000 years old, we are going from practice to now the lab. Right, trying to find out why something is so, you talk about, the yoga, etc. Now only we are understanding through the scientific methods that exist today. Now, how can we make it more predictable? How can we make it more, let's say, where people accept it? When you say take aspirin, they know exactly what happens. When you said yoga, how do you prove that it actually benefits you?
So first of all, the body of literature contains tens of thousands of peer-reviewed papers, mostly originally from India, but now from all over the world. Secondly, today, if you have worked with, you probably know more about this than I do, but in India, there are systems like Ayurveda, Siddha medicine, etc. And also these great herbalists in India. I knew one, his name was, he was called Maharishi. And he could look at a plant and he could tell you exactly what it did, okay? And then we would look at the literature and find out he was right, okay? Or there are some other Siddha practitioners who can look at somebody's face and give you a diagnosis. I never believed all this, by the way, originally. Or somebody would tell me I changed my diet and my arthritis went to remission. I never believed all of this. My training did not allow me to believe any of this. Today, you can open your bank account by just your facial expression, right? You can open your garage door by saying, open the garage door through the tone of your voice. So what is happening right now is that we are creating, amongst others, with other technology people, anybody here, welcome to join us. We are creating algorithms that look at micro expressions of the face, eye movements, tone of voice, blood pressure, heart rate variability, galvanic skin response, autonomic function, and creating master algorithms that you can actually show exactly what you asked. The future of well-being is predictable, it's precise, it's preventive, requires your participation, but it is very process-oriented, and there are algorithms to measure everything in the body, not only measure everything in the body, but also see the correlation of self-regulating systems with other self-regulated systems. So the immune system with the endocrine system with neuroplasticity with epigenetics, all these correlations. And this is what we do at our foundation with other technology people, because technology for the first time is validating exactly what you asked. Also, Ayurveda has all this pharmacology of 10,000 herbs. And now it turns out that most of them are what we call adaptogens. They modulate at a cellular level the activity of what happens during stressful episodes or what happens in inflammation. So there's a whole body of research now looking at Ayurvedic combinations or herb, Indian, particularly Indian things like ashwagandha, shatavari, amalaki. These are all adaptogens and they have biosynergy. So we are now looking, and by the way, as you said, in the West, you start with the test tube and then you do animal experiments, then you do clinical trials. It's a long process. And when you finally come out with a drug, half the time it doesn't work. And if it works, it has a lot of side effects as well. But now looking at this way of modeling, in the future, actually you don't even need to do animal experiments and test tube experiments. You start with in silico, which means on computer, with modeling biochemical pathways and seeing their correlations. And then once you get evidence in silico, then you do the test tube and you bypass all the other human experiments. That's going to happen soon. Already MIT, Harvard, I'm seeing a lot of scientists who are looking at indigenous medicines, not only from India, but from across the world, because a lot of these indigenous herbs also alter the microbial activity, which is the genetic information. 99% of the genetic information in your body is not even human, it's bacteria.
Thank you, Deepak. A couple of questions on today's problems. One is from Raj Asava. He says, how will rethinking happen in today's convoluted socio-political, divided and divisive world we live in? Another one from Raji Berry that says, the world is inflamed. I'm wondering what your thoughts are regarding income and other inequalities, and how can you address them via meditation, etc.
These are very complicated questions that require very complicated context and understanding of the meaning of what's happening. All I can say is the first question was about our insecurities globally, unemployment. I think you'll see a revolution in that. We already are seeing that. You know, you can be in Bangladesh and have a job in Chicago. And you can be in Chicago and be a consultant in China, and will happen more and more. So it will be much more global. First of all, commerce will be easier. The internet doesn't respect boundaries anyway. So, you know, this is a very good time for countries like India and China and others, even East European countries and many countries in South Asia that are technologically, you know, so advanced. Like in the US, honestly, when I land in the US, it looks like a third world country. You know, when you come from Singapore or Hong Kong, or even some of the airports in India, and you land in Los Angeles or JFK, you say, where am I landing? You know, so we are seeing a revolution right now in technology, in also social structures, and also commerce. I think we will see, maybe we will also see cryptocurrencies emerging for specific projects and specific ecosystems. And I think this is an opportunity to reinvent the entire financial structures through creating online and offline communities. You know, in India, they say 3 things you need for complete transformation: Seva, which is service; Sangha, which is community; and Simran, which is reflection and reflective inquiry. So at this moment, reflective inquiry should also be, what is the opportunity? I know a lot of people who are looking at opportunities. That's one. Simran, that's reflective opportunity, also means meditation, stress management. Okay. Sangha, you can create sanghas online and offline. Seva, this is the time for us to see how can we help each other, not financially, of course, for those who are in a position to do that, but also ask for financial help. There's lots of opportunities to receive financial help and give financial help. We have to embrace this concept of Seva, Sangha, and Simran, and now we can do it online. And you know, we can offer. LinkedIn is a good example. I want to know about anyone here, I can go to LinkedIn. But it should be much more than that. It should be, what are your aspirations? What are your needs? What are you looking for? Instead of just your bio, it should ask the questions like Malika said. Who are we? What do we want? What's our higher calling? What are we grateful for? How do we embrace meaning right now? So right now, what the world is going through is a process that we call grief. Grief happens when you lose something. And it happens when grief happens when you took it for granted. So, and when people, I see grief all the time when patients are dying. I used to in an emergency room, if somebody is going through a heart attack, you'd see them going through the stages of grief in 1 hour. So first, victimization. Why me? Well, right now, it's not just me, it's everyone. Then the second stage is anger, resentment, grievances, frustration, resignation, helplessness. Some people, only some people, get to the next stage, which is acceptance. As soon as you accept, you feel peace. Then the final stage is, what does it mean? What does it mean right now? If we ask that question, we can find meaning and purpose in this whole crisis to create a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. And we cannot depend on power mongers who are only interested in cronyism, influence peddling, and corruption, which is basically every politician and national leader, in my opinion, is a gangster. Okay, there are a few who are not, but I don't want to name the ones who are not, because the rest are all gangsters. They're thugs, they're mafia, and we cannot depend on them. And the business is going in that direction as well. So we need to really focus on how collectively, globally, as communities, as grassroots movements, as humans, not just selfish. We are not human bodies. We are not human doings. We are not human thinkings. We are human beings. That requires a sense of humanity, which requires what Malika was talking about, social and emotional intelligence, love, compassion, joy, empathy, help. If we can somehow, and there's so many intelligent people in this world, that I think it's going to happen. We are going to have a global Sangha that says, screw these guys, we'll make the change. We'll be the change, in Mahatma Gandhi's words, that we want to see in the world. And that can happen through Sangha. And community Sangha through the internet.
Thank you, Deepak. A question for Malika from one of our members, Priya, is how do we get children involved in this process of both awareness, thinking, mindfulness, etc.? Malika, are you there?
So I get this question all the time, which is, one, what is it like being Deepak Chopra's daughter? And two, what about our children? And so I think they're linked. I ask parents, what is your practice? And don't worry about your children yet. Focus on yourself. And that's what our experience was. When my parents found a practice, it transformed our entire family. When I have my practice, it influences my kids, and I invite them to participate. My parents never, ever forced Gautam or I to meditate. Rather, they had their practice. We were intrigued. We wanted to participate because as a family, we were closer. We saw our parents were happier, and in general, our life was better. So my advice to parents is find your own practice. And then when I'm speaking to kids, I tell kids, you know what, you can influence your parents and maybe teach them something. So that's the goal with the books that I'm doing.
Thank you. A question for Deepak is, can you, from Narendra, one of our members, can you recommend one of your books that guide us how to live a lifestyle free of inflammation? And my wife is interested as well.
There are 3 books that they are co-authored with Rudy Tanzi, who was a geneticist and neuroscientist. So one is called Super Brain. That's the first one. The second is called Super Genes. The third one is called The Healing Self. A very simple book that, I think Malika might agree on this, is The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. And, you know, there's storytelling in all these, in these books. And Mallika's books are particularly good because they're very practical. Mine tend to be abstract. And so my last book is Meta-Human, which is about transcendence and samadhi and going beyond the conditioned mind. So I think Mallika's books, and then maybe if you want to get really technical in the science, then Super Brain, Super Genes, and the healing stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Another question from one of our members, our board member, Priya Natarajan, is every, question is, let's see, sounds like we're moving towards highly personalized medicine. Will this once again be just for the wealthy?
I hope not. I think right now technology is going to basically democratize health and well-being, particularly if there is a grassroots movement. And also right now, at least in the US, there is a movement for insurance companies to actually look at lifestyle and prevention as economically more viable. And it's also more precision. So precision medicine is coming, telemedicine is coming. In fact, right now, because of COVID-19, telemedicine is suddenly very popular and becoming legal in most states. So you don't have to waste time going to see a doctor. You can send your EKG through an app and it can be read by a machine. And the accuracy is better than a cardiologist. So, you know, we are going to see a lot of automation. And this is the time when we can democratize everything. And this thing that I'm holding in my hand is more powerful than the computer at MIT that sent men to the moon. And, you know, I think we're going to see democratization. I hope we are. And it's the responsibility of entrepreneurs to make sure that that happens.
Deepak, I know it's past the hour. Do you have a few more minutes? We have a ton of questions.
A few more. I do have another event, but I can
but I'll give you a couple more. There's a question here. Let's see. Can you give us, from Renu Agarwal, can you give us 2 or 3 personal practices, small changes that would recommend us to adopt that would be impactful to the health of body, mind, and soul? Just 2 or 3 small things that we can do to improve.
Why don't you show them the STOP formula?
Sure. So, which involves awareness and breath. So STOP, S is for stop. It's an acronym. T is take 3 breaths. So we can do that right now. Breathe in and out. Another breath in and out. And a third breath in and out. And O is now observe what's happening in your body. So you can do either a quick body scan from your feet up through your body to your head, or just observe different areas of your body that may be feeling tension or calling for attention. And then P is for proceed. So continue.
Basically, you break the reaction to react. So before you react, you cut the cord. Before you react, you do the STOP formula, you observe your reaction to react, and then proceed with awareness. That's so simple, and you can do it anytime.
Thank you. And I think we'll leave with one last question. A couple of people are curious, Deepak, with the beautiful artwork behind you. So can you, the 2 paintings behind you, can you?
You know, when I open my eyes after meditation, I invite the Divine Feminine, which is all the archetypes of the Shaktis. These are the Shaktis, the Divine Feminine, that embody beauty, intuition, nurturing, tenderness, and love. And then, of course, this is Krishna, which is very interesting. You know, if you look at Krishna is, in that sense, Krishna is ambiguous. He has both the masculine and the feminine archetypes. So the masculine are, you know, initiative, strength, purpose, even conquest. And the feminine is, of course, the beauty and intuition and nurturing and tenderness, affection. So combination of Shiva Shakti in a sense, but as archetypal energies and states of information. I don't look at deities as some gods and goddesses out there. Deities are embodiments of higher consciousness that we can incarnate in our own being, and then we become capable of extraordinary things. As long as we think from the level of a person, you can't achieve much. But when you think from that level, you can achieve a lot.
Well, with that, Deepak and Malika, this has been a fascinating hour. I think our members have really enjoyed your wisdom, your practical advice as well.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone. This is M.R. Rangaswamy within Diaspora. We are pleased to have all of you today for one of our COVID sessions, which we started when the pandemic started a couple of months ago. We've had many notable speakers, Dr. Vivek Murthy, the former Surgeon General. We had Dr. Ram from Apollo Hospitals. We had Geeta Gopinath, the IMF Chief Economist. And today we're privileged to have a father-daughter combination, both Deepak and Malika Chopra, who are going to talk about mindfulness in stressful times. And I can tell you this, after being locked up in the house for over 2.5 months, we all could use a good dose of how to survive, how to thrive in these crazy times. Great to have so many of you in Diaspora members join us today. The format is going to be the following. Malika is going to start off and set the stage, and then we'll also hear from Deepak. We've saved quite a bit of time at the end for questions. A lot of you have told us that you really want to talk to Malika and Deepak, so we've set aside time. And you can do that either by asking a question online on video, or you can also use the chat box, okay? So to get started, we have Malika Chopra. Malika is a mom, media entrepreneur, public speaker, published author, and also an in Diaspora member. She's author of Just Breathe and another book also called Just Feel. And these are aimed at kids from 8 to 12 years old. They're beautiful, full color illustrated books. She's also written a book, Living with Intent, and she shares insights she gained to seek meaning and balance as a mom and an entrepreneur who was overwhelmed by work, family, and responsibilities. I'm sure a lot of you mothers out there feel the same way that Malika felt when she started writing her book. So Malika, welcome.
Thank you, MR, and nice to be in this forum. And I want to thank all of you in Diaspora who has been so supportive of all my books and sharing lots of the appearances I make. So it's nice to be here. First time I'm doing something like this with my dad watching on video. So that always adds a new twist, maybe a little pressure. I just wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about some of the work I'm doing, but why I'm doing it more importantly. I am an author, but I always say I define myself as a mom and mom first, something that I learned from my mother, Rita Chopra. So I have two daughters, 18-year-old Tara, who just graduated from high school 2 days ago in a virtual ceremony, and Leela, who's almost 16 years old. So the title of the seminar or workshop is Mindfulness in Stressful Times. So obviously we're living in unprecedented times, but in some ways I think we're always dealing with different forms of stress. And the stress may be more these days when we are trapped at home and thinking about lives and our lives and our purpose and our existence more when we're at home. But there's also as always, global issues. Just today, we can look at what's happening in our country and the unrest we're seeing. So we always are facing dilemmas and questions and needing to search our soul for answers and how we can serve. So my journey to where I am today is obviously because of my parents. I grew up in Boston, where my parents had recently immigrated to the US as a young married couple with $8 in their pocket, a similar story to probably many others on this call. And my brother and I watched how hard they worked, how they had to find ways to connect with this foreign country, but really watching my father, who worked nonstop, but also trying to figure out our places in our families and in our communities and in the world. And so I will say that when my father discovered meditation, there was a huge shift in my family's life. I was about 9 years old and my brother Gautam was 6 years old. And the practice of meditation brought our family much closer together. In fact, it probably brought my father more into the family unit because he was so busy. But once as a family, we began this practice, we were more connected. And so I went on to do, many things, got my MBA, started companies. But when I was about 30 years old and pregnant for the first time with Tara 18 years ago, I was pregnant during 9/11. And on the morning of 9/11, received a phone call from my father. I was 5 months pregnant. My father crying on the other end of the line as he had just made an emergency landing when the first plane had crashed into the first building. And for a few hours, we thought that my brother was on one of the planes. And it was a time of a lot of stress. But as a mom, or about to become a mom, all of the hope, excitement, magic, and the inspiration of becoming a mother suddenly became fear, anxiety, stress, and deep questioning. And it brought me back to many of the techniques that my father had taught Gautam and I when we were young. So it began with meditation. And I'm not going to go into all of the benefits of meditation because you can Google that now and see all of the research. But when our meditation practice was about connection, but then also about self-reflection. And so I talk specifically a lot about intention, a phrase that my dad shared with Gautam and I when we were young. It goes like this: I am responsible for what I see. I choose the feelings I experience and set the goals I will achieve. And everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and receive as I have asked. So as kids, he would ask us, what do you ask for? And we would name all these material things, trips. But then he'd ask us about, do you want love, connection, a sense of purpose, inspiration? And so that really concept of setting intentions, our deepest seeds of desire, for purpose, for connection, for love, had very much shaped my childhood. And in becoming a mother, I was reminded of so many of these techniques, because now I was really faced with the question of how can I serve? How can I serve my family and my community and my world? And so for me at that stage, there was a big shift in terms of my work, but also my purpose. And so I've now written several books. I spend a lot of time now working with kids in schools and in communities. And I feel so blessed because these were tools that I was given as a child. When I work with kids, it's really simple. So my books really are very practical and really don't have much philosophy. My father will take this on to talk about consciousness and other things, but I begin with kids really on the experience. So just really beginning, the title of my book is Just Breathe, of how do we take a deep breath and in and out And in that process, how do we begin to connect to ourselves? So when I do these work with kids, and we can get more into this later if people are interested, really beginning with breath, 1 breath, 4 breaths, body awareness exercises, meditation practices, and then also sharing things with children and families, whether it is taking mindful walks or doing a mindful meal. And then my next book, which will come out next year, is about self-reflection and intention, where we start with kids to ask deep questions. Who am I? What do I want? How can I serve? What am I grateful for? And plant those seeds early on for a life of purpose. So, you know, my daughter is, my elder daughter is 18. She's hopefully heading off to college. And my dad did a beautiful tribute video for her in a family collection that.
Hello, everyone. This is M.R. Rangaswamy within Diaspora. We are pleased to have all of you today for one of our COVID sessions, which we started when the pandemic started a couple of months ago. We've had many notable speakers, Dr. Vivek Murthy,